Hey, everyone, and welcome back to the Consulting Success Podcast. Michael Zapersky here, and today I'm with Leo Bottary. Leo, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, so you are a keynote speaker, a workshop facilitator, a podcast host. You are also an adjunct professor. You are the founder and managing partner at Peer Innovation. And you're an expert on the subjects of peer advantage and building high-performance teams. In your latest book, which we'll talk more about, is Peer Innovation: What Advisory Groups Can Teach Us About Building High-Performing Teams. And that really summarizes your work over decades of academic research, fieldwork, and stories. So before we kind of get into all that, because I certainly want to talk about how consultants can build higher performing teams and become better leaders, let's go back in time a little bit. You started your work kind of in public relations. What type of work were you actually doing before you got into the world of PR?
Well, before the world of PR, it was really politics, but now you're going way back. So I was a political science major, graduated from Jacksonville University in Florida. My first job after selling cars, because I had this job with Senator Paul Tsongas that was supposed to start in October. We had graduated the previous April. I pretty much had no money, no vehicle, whatever. So the perfect job was to sell cars, where after 30 days, I'd get a brand new demo that I could drive. And, so I worked there for 6 months, probably one of the more educational business experiences I ever had, for sure. Yeah. But worked in politics for a while. And enjoyed that a lot. But at the same time, what I also recognized that there were a lot of people who had the same interest in politics I had, but worked in the private sector and were doing well also, and not nearly working, the 20-hour days that you do when you're, at that age, working, especially on national campaigns and all of that. So it was really through that I got my first job in PR, and I was writing speeches largely and for the CEO and the senior leadership team of the company at the Stop and Shop companies at the time, which back in like 1985 to 1987 was like a $4+ billion company, which is a pretty good size, public company back in that day. And but yeah, kind of cut my teeth on the client side of things in PR, and then over the years kind of straddled between, I was on the client side for a while, then on the agency side. So I got experience with a lot of different kinds of companies, which was really, really great. Recognizing that you do the best PR work for the companies and the businesses that you like the best, right? That you can get the most enthusiastic about and all of that. And so in many respects, the work I do today is a result of a pivot that was really rather easy, in that I went from having had an agency, kind of enough agency jobs for a while there. I was working on my own. And then I was here in San Diego, and I really wasn't connected to anything, really, other than my clients who were typically, were far away. Boeing Space Exploration, one of my clients, right? They're in Houston. So this position became available to head up corporate communications for Vistage. And Vistage worldwide assembles and facilitates peer advisory groups for CEOs and business leaders all over the world. And I thought, wow, in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, for a company that was looking to get back on the national media stage, what a great opportunity to get connected, inside the community, and to move a brand down the field in an area that I really took to and really enjoyed.
Yeah. When you look back at those days of being both in politics and in kind of public relations, what lessons or principles did you take or hold on to from that time that you feel is still very applicable today, that you really hold as kind of true guiding principles that you're actively applying?
That whenever you underestimate the impact of something, it will always come back and bite you. That would be the big, probably many, yeah. I mean, it's just, the reality is that you've got to be prepared for, and especially in this world, which is far, not worse, that's not the right way to put it, but let's say it's far more immediate, right? Mm-hmm. Back in, when I was first at least doing a lot of crisis communications work in the 80s and 90s, you had time to actually respond to things. Everything seemed fast, but it was nothing like it is today. When you have people who are on the scene at any given moment with, with their, shooting video from their phones and all of that. I mean, it's a night and day difference. So, I think it's really taking everything seriously. I think living your values becomes really important. When I see companies who truly, and I mean, not just put them up on the wall and say, there they are, and they shove them aside and then they go about their business. But I'm talking about organizations that truly live their values. That never costs you money. It just never does. Even if you wanted to make the case that somebody takes a hit in the short term, it's so short term and it comes back so exponentially in their favor that, I think just recognizing that living to your values and knowing your purpose, I think is really important as well. Again, these are the kinds of things that people regard as, people go off in a retreat and they do their value statements and the vision and mission and purpose and these other things, and they're not meaningful. And for some organizations, maybe they're not, but when they are, when you decide to embrace those things. And I say that no matter if someone's, alone, these solopreneurs that we're talking about, me now included, you really have to embrace all of those things and start from there. And if you do that and can continue to do that, not only during good times, but when times get challenging, I would say those are two pretty big lessons that, I learned from communication and PR and what that looks like.
Yeah, I think those are really powerful points. For the solo consultant out there, even if it is just you, knowing what your values are and as you said, the purpose and the mission, these are things that you can and should channel into your content, into your intellectual property, so that you have a voice, you can tell your story. And for us, what we found, over the last few years, as we've been really building our team out, that's why people come into our world. That's why people want to be part of the team, because they clearly can identify and resonate with those values. So as you think about, scaling and growing the business, those are definitely central to it. So you went from, running a kind of public relations and being in that space in the corporate environment, working at Vistage, which for people in the US, right, quite a well-known organization, kind of in that corporate CEO executive type of world, to later starting your own actual consulting business. And here you are today, right, running Pure Innovation. When you decided to make that shift to start your own business, how did you go about landing your first few clients? Where did those clients come from?
Well, in my case, again, this was a pretty easy transition. First of all, earlier in my career, I did have my own public relations firm for just about 5 years before I sold it. So I had some sense of what going into business that way would look like. And I ended up with 11 employees or so. And we had a really successful practice. It was fun. It wasn't something that I was excited about doing for a lot of reasons at the time, largely because my name was on the door and I was living in a place where I thought, I don't know if I want to live here for the rest of my life. I found it more limiting than liberating. And it was kind of an interesting thing there. So me being able to sell it and continue to do the work I love to do without having that was really helpful. Transitioning from Vistage, however, was a bit different in that one of the things I had done, so I led a rebranding effort at Vistage right near the end, of my time there. I left there in late 2016, but in 2013, I led a brand refresh of the company. And I'd be asking CEOs, how do you learn, grow, bring new thinking into your companies? And they would tell me things like, well, I read books, I have a coach, I hire consultants, I go to events and conferences. Some would tell me they do, participate in executive development programs at places like Harvard and Stanford. Nobody was telling me that being part of a peer group was the way they learn. It wasn't even in the consideration set. So I remember just going to the board of directors as I was reporting on the rollout. And I said, we've been doing this since 1957. There's been a whole lot of other organizations been doing this as well. And we're all trying to sell a Mercedes to someone who doesn't even know what a car is. I said, maybe we should step back and try to write a definitive narrative about the category. And so that's really what we set out to do. So I spent my time actually late, my last year and a half, 2 years there, working with the CEO, writing a book called The Power of Peers, How the Company You Keep Drives Leadership Growth and Success, designed strictly to make the case for this so that people would make it part of their consideration set. But then what happened was, once the book was done, and things were shifting at the company at this time and everything too, and there was a new CMO and all of that, which I had worked with and worked very well with the book project with the CEO. But it was kind of time to say, all right, well, what are we going to do with this content, really? So it was really kind of a decision where I left Vistage to take this content and do something with it. And initially, again, it was kind of a soft landing for me because my first client, in many respects, was Vistage. I would go and I would speak to Vistage groups throughout the US, Canada, the UK, and that was really great. So to be able to have that base and then kind of build from that, not only from an income base, but the fact that I could have literally the practice and the experiences and everything. So I've now done just shy of 240 workshops for Vistage groups, in a number of different countries now. And now I've done them for other organizations as well. But there's no question that core experience that I had to be able to build and grow off of that was hugely helpful. It's not like I was sitting by myself saying, all right, let's go get my first client, so I was very fortunate in that regard.
Does the majority of your business still come through the Vistage workshops that you deliver and the context you have from the world of Vistage?
Majority, no, not anymore. But I remain committed to doing that for a number of reasons. First of all, it's very much, they were there for me to kind of get that rolling. I mean, it was no question there's mutual benefit from it. But I also think now they've really found that the workshop that I do, particularly for new groups, right? You've got these CEO members who join a peer advisory group, and they think they know what they joined, but they don't really have, any sense of what they're really capable of doing together.
Right.
So I work with a lot of these new groups, and we really get a chance to talk about who do we want to be when we grow up? What's that going to look like a year from now? It's not me assessing anything. I go through a lot of the models and the 5-factor framework that was originally built through the Power of Peers and has since been advanced now through peer innovation over time. But we spend time together really talking about how to leverage all the intellectual and emotional capital in the room and what that can mean for everyone there. And so I enjoy doing that. And the more that I continue doing work with groups, the more that I continue to learn. I'm doing, work with other groups as well. And I'm enjoying that, quite a bit. But now I'm also taking, and as you know, the subject of the third book, Peer Innovation, is what peer advisory groups can teach us about building high-performing teams. And it's very true that over the years now, I've really, it's not hard to miss that what CEO peer advisory groups in particular do so brilliantly can be applied to help teams be higher performing in organizations, whether they're the cross-functional leadership team in an organization or project teams. And interestingly enough, I not only take what I've learned through that entire process with Vistage, but if you layer in the strategic communication background I have, how we communicate with our people and how they communicate with one another is huge. Right. So these tend to blend in a way that I think provides a lot of value.
So we're going to get more into that because I want to make sure that we cover some of that valuable information and kind of guidance for everyone. Before we do that, I would be remiss, and I think I would leave everybody on the hook if we didn't explore one of your previous companies before. You mentioned it was a PR agency. You had 10, 11 or so people. You ran it for 5 years. You later sold it. It had your name on the door. I mean, if you go to your LinkedIn profile, the company was your name. Yeah. Looking back at that experience, did having your name as the company name limit the business in any way? Did it impact the sale of the business? Were any positives or negatives that you could kind of attribute to your company name being your name?
No, the only, not in terms of running the business at all. In fact, it was helpful and necessary at the beginning. The only time, and it only felt for me that it would have hurt, was for me to walk away from the business and then kind of what happens there. But as long as I was going to remain part of the business, look at Edelman, look at a lot of these firms, I mean, they are very successful largely because of the people behind that company and the incredible organizations they built. I mean, you look at what Richard Edelman has built there, and it's extraordinary. In fact, one of the studies they do that I find to be incredibly important to my work and peers is the Edelman Trust Barometer that comes out every January, right? It's an incredible stuff. I don't care if you're a solopreneur, entrepreneur, big corporate, whatever. This is a really important study to pay attention to when we think about public trust in institutions, because when we don't trust institutions, who do we look to? We look to one another, and understanding those dynamics and what that looks like and how invaluable that can be for solopreneurs and entrepreneurs, I think is huge.
Any lessons that you took from the experience of selling your business that again you've implemented into your current business of Peer Innovation?
Yes. Now where this is going with Peer Innovation, I can't talk about yet, but suffice it to say, you're going to know where it's going when I tell you that the thing that I wish I had done when I had my company, I would have benefited a lot by having a partner or two, or to have been part of a peer group back in those days, right? Yeah. Because we all have blind spots. We're all really good at some things and really not so much at others. And I would have benefited greatly and probably would have sold the company for tons more if I had the kind of partners where we could have done it together. And so, I look at Peer Innovation and I look at scaling this, and I recognize that this is not, could I do it myself, and could I inch along, and kind of do that way alone, I suppose. But when I think about the purpose of what I'm trying to do, and that is to extend the reach of content that I know works and can be of such value to teams all over the world, to the extent that I can get so some people and some resources around helping make that possible and make that pie many times bigger than I could ever grow it on my own. So that's a big thing I learned back from then, and it informs certainly what I'm doing now.
Let's talk about that for a moment. I mean, you have a lot of intellectual property, a lot of content that you've developed, whether it's through your podcast stuff, from Vistage and just what you're currently creating today. How do you think about distribution right now? What are you doing? What are the best practices that have allowed you to, as you said, when you get your content in front of the right people, it's good for the business, it's good for spreading the word. Once you've identified who those people are, how are you actually going about, how are you spending your time to make sure that your content gets in front of those people?
Yeah, well, at first I really try to match it up with their needs, to the extent that, a conversation is had, or someone hears about my work, or I'm introduced in some way. I really want to get a sense of what precisely are they looking for, and what is this going to do for them? And also to get a sense of their values and what really matters and what that looks like. And for some cases, what I do fits beautifully within a culture. With other cases, that's going to be a transition for them. And to know that you've got real commitment for the senior leadership team to make that kind of transition necessary for what the challenges of the future are important. And I think you have that honest conversation up front, as opposed to, and so that we're all really clear. If there's anything I learned, and I think we did well when I had Bottary & Partners Public Relations, and what, is imperative for any relationship that I'm engage in today with a client, is that we all have real clarity and agreement about what success looks like. It's so easy to have yourself in a situation where everyone at the office is high-fiving each other because they think they did a great job, and you go and meet with the client and they're like all disappointed, and you're like, well, what the hell, right? I mean, that should never happen. And when it does happen, I personally think it's the agency's fault. You've got to ferret that out, and you've got to have clarity on it. And sometimes we aren't always willing to have those harder, deep conversations early on because we think we're going to scare the client away or something like that, when in fact, you're only going to deepen your relationship with them, and you're going to be in a situation where you don't have the kind of surprises, at the end that are going to compromise, yourself or them.
Approach that you found for that? I mean, you're mentioning about trying to get everybody on the same page to really get clear on what success looks like. is that simply a matter of sitting down, having a conversation and just asking, hey, what does success look like for you? Or are there specific questions or an approach that you found that works really well to get everybody aligned around that conversation?
Yeah. So this is interesting because oftentimes when you're dealing with people in companies, you're not always dealing with one person.
Sure.
And sometimes people's definition of success can vary.
Mm-hmm.
So, so you've got to get a sense of what that is. And again, sometimes, and I've had it where I'm hearing some very different definitions of success, and I have to think about how do we get these folks in a room or whatever and say, let's talk about this, and let's talk about what this looks like and what our real priorities are and how we are going to rank these and what this looks like. Because anything I do or, has to be geared toward making that happen, try to reverse engineer that, right?
Mm-hmm.
For them. And then sometimes I will say they need help with what success looks like. And that's okay too, that you're going to participate in that conversation where they're not exactly sure what they want. They think that what you offer sounds really good. And, there's a lot of, things here, but when you talk about what the implications of it really are, for example, someone could be, to oversimplify this, someone could be part of an organization where it's very individually driven in terms of everything, awards, compensation, and the whole deal, right? Well, now all of a sudden it's going to be all about the team. Great. Well, that's fine. And you can do that, but you better have a commitment to that in every single area of your company. Everything, your compensation, your rewards, your how you celebrate, what you do. I mean, the whole deal, has got to be reinforcing and overlapping. And you can't send mixed messages about, oh yeah, the team was really important now, but what really matters is if I hit my numbers over here, then I get my individual bonus and this kind of stuff. I mean, so there's got to be a real commitment there too. And that's not always easy, granted, that's, and the bigger the company, the harder it can be. And so, but you really have to that work up front in order to really create a level of clarity around what we're going to embark upon together and what the steps look like and how this is going to work and what it looks like, recognizing that there are times during this process where we're going to have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Right? Because or at the beginning, when someone says, hey, do you know how you're going to approach this? And I'll look them right and say, nope, I have no clue. So we'll figure it out over time, but I have no idea. So if you're looking for, and nobody will answer that question for you without guessing. And right. I'm just not going to do that, So yeah. As long as we can kind of recognize that we're all going to keep our eyes and ears open and work together and communicate, we should be okay.
I want to bring us back for a moment to this, the body of work that you've developed and that you continue to develop today. When you look at everything that you've done through the books or through articles or through partnerships, what would you say is like one of the biggest distribution wins? One of the things that you've done that has allowed you to get your work out there and it's had a real kind of tangible, meaningful kind of progress or win attached to it that you think maybe others often overlook? Is there some area that when you look around at the consultant friends that you have or people in professional services, you just don't think people are doing enough yet? Here you are, you've done it, and it's actually worked really well.
So I'll go back to, it's the people who you surround yourself with, right? It's peers and peer groups. So then there's a few that I've been involved with in recent years that have been tremendous. Look at the C-Suite Network and Jerry Hazlett, what he's doing with C-Suite Radio and all of that. It's not like you become part of it and you never hear from them again and you're just part of a wallpaper of podcasters or things like that. I mean, there's an incredible effort at putting people together, learning from one another, being champions for one another's work. And that's opened up a lot of doors and introduced me and my work to a lot of different people. The work I do at CEO World Magazine as an opinion columnist and now an advisory board member, has been, tremendous in that regard. I was involved in a more of a international group called Win Mastermind. It was run by Alexander Keenan for a while out of the Netherlands. And of course, part of it for me when I joined it, it was actually pre-COVID when I got involved in it. And it's because my travel schedule was such that I couldn't be a reliable participant in an in-person peer group. But I also thought it would be ridiculous for me to be speaking on this stuff and someone says to me, "Hey, what group are you part of?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm not in one. Nah, I don't do that." Right.
Yeah.
So the point is that, so I was able to be part of a group that met, once a month for a couple of hours. We also did some things in between, but it was all virtual. And I got to meet different people from around the world. And
Right.
that was another way. People who were kind of doing what I was doing, but in different, areas, and we would help one another. And, there was some roll up our sleeves, do some work on the business type of stuff. There were certainly some making contacts, and these people remain my friends today, many of whom I've never met in person, but they're all buds and we all help each other, and it's really nice. So
Yeah.
so I think
And
that's
your
been a big
experience
thing.
with CEO worldwide. I mean, you, as you said, you're much more involved today in terms of board member and so forth. But even as a columnist, even where you're writing, you're sharing your perspectives and ideas. For those who are listening and are with us right now and thinking, okay, great. Like, I'd also love to be involved with an industry publication or some kind of media that my ideal clients are often paying attention to. Can you walk us through, like, what did you do to actually land that initial opportunity where you could write for them consistently?
It's a great question. Yeah, I don't even remember. I would have to look back at the very first article I submitted to CEO World. But I think I basically just contacted them. Obviously, the work I was doing and what their editorial was lined up really well. And basically found out what the parameters were and what the things in terms of all of that. Posted my first article and then posted another one, and then I started just getting into a real cadence with them, and doing it. It was just a great place to post, a great way to extend the reach of the content beyond just like posting it on my site or on LinkedIn or Twitter or something like that. And then over time, I've probably written, I'm not sure how many it is now. It's getting close to about 75 pieces, I think, that I've written just for CEO World alone. And they've just been wonderful, really great to work with. And one day they just approached me and said, "Hey, if you'd like to be an advisory board member, we'd love to have you." And so I'm doing that. And I've also recommended, some other people to write, for them. I know Larry Robertson was recently on your show, and he's one of them, and he's writing for CEO World now, among other places. Of course, he's a content machine. Larry Robertson is, but great guy also, and someone who I met basically through LinkedIn and through some other folks. And he's been a guest on my podcast. And we, I think are advocates of each other's work, not just because, but we've read it and we enjoy it and we believe in it, and, some good stuff there. So, yeah. So there's that.
That's great. So in your book, you kind of, and also on your website, you talk about this principle of the power of we begins with you. Could you elaborate on that? Could you explain what that means and why you feel that is such a powerful statement?
So this is kind of interesting. A few years ago, I was at a CEO peer advisory group meeting. And during the meeting, there was this conversation, because I lead a workshop where we have very intentional conversations about certain subjects. And one of them was, it's about the right people. Not just do we have physically the right people in the room, but are we exhibiting the right behaviors that make for really good members who are really strong contributors to the value proposition here, right? So anyway, this particular group had an issue with attendance. And it was like this conversation just kind of kept going on. It was like someone hit a beach ball, and they were just bopping it from one person to the next, right? So there was a guy sitting next to me who we'll call Richard, and he was literally right to my left. And Richard was getting annoyed with this conversation. His anger started becoming palpable after a while. So the next thing you know, Richard stands up in the middle of this conversation and gives about a 90-second speech about how, hey, look, I'm here, I pay the dues when I can, whatever. And my attendance isn't great, but he went on and on and on. And finally he says, and when I'm not here, I'm the one who loses. And he sat down. So it was in this kind of now what moment, right? So he sits down and I'm standing up there. And so he gave me a gift, of course, at the end. And so I leaned over and just over to my right. And I said to the person over here, I said, would you mind giving me 1 minute on what's lost when Richard can't be here? And the person, oh man, when Richard's not here, he brings this perspective and we get to talk about this. And he always contributes such and such, right? Then I go to the second member. By the time I get to the third, Richard literally was welling up in tears. Now I got to run over to Richard, right? And I'm like, look, I didn't do that to show you up. I did that because if I asked that question about anybody else around this table, everyone would have responded in the same way. You guys are like a jazz ensemble. You can't just yank instruments out and hope it's going to sound the same. The point, in going back to your question, is that Richard knew as CEO how much he meant back at his organization. He had no clue how much he meant around that table. And so once he recognized that, and owned that the power of a lot of that group began with him being there and being committed and showing up and bringing his A game every month, the more he realized, okay, now I get it. And he actually apologized to the group and said, you know what? All right, got it. I'm going to do my best to be here more often and not be so cavalier about my attendance. Because now, again, he realized now how much it mattered to everyone else that he was there. So once we start owning, this also goes to the work of Angela Myers when she talks about how much people matter, right? She talks about kids. She has a non-for-profit, choosetomatter.org. And it's designed to basically, say, look, here's what I'm good at. Here's what I contribute. Here's what I bring to the table. To own that, bring your best at it, learn, grow, and all of it, and be there to contribute, whether it's to a peer group or to your team or whatever it happens to be, recognizing that, and if you see something wrong, you see something happening or whatever, you just don't say, it's like people who say, oh, my team sucks. Oh, you're on the team though, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, what are you doing to make it better? Well, not, you know what I mean? So everybody's got to be in if you're going to make that go. So I think when you're not, it doesn't.
It's a very powerful example. For those who are solo consultants or small firm owners, you do a lot of work, Leo, around accountability, leadership, high performance teams. Out of all of the kind of like your body of work, what advice would you have, or what would you recommend to the solo consultant or the small kind of firm owner that would help them to grow, to see more progress, just from kind of your best practices, your principles that relate to accountability or leadership, or creating the right culture for a high performing team? What kind of stands out for you as common mistakes that people make and therefore opportunities that exist?
I remember hearing something that Patrick Lencioni said at a speech that he gave about 10 years ago. And it was something that I always did, but it was so great to hear someone like him validate that. And that's really about being generous. Too often I see, especially solo consultants, be a bit stingy with trying to share and do things, right? They want to write the proposal and then they're all worried about what they're going to get paid for or not, and this and that. And they tend to, have this little finite pie in their mind, versus, and Patrick Lencioni talked about the fact that, how many people he's competed against where everyone's going back and forth in the proposal. And I just started working for him, basically. I just started helping him, and we have these conversations and more people are like, man, we're getting a lot, and I find too, that the more generous people are, more that you get a sense that they've got a lot more horsepower than they're even letting on, right? So the people, conversely, and I think maybe ironically, the people who are stingy about what they know, it's usually because there's not much. That's all they know in some respects. Like, it doesn't run very deep. So, and I don't say this about me in any, self-aggrandizing way, but let's face it, we talk to Larry Robertson, you talk to anybody who writes a book, like you take a book like Peer Innovation, right? So just because someone reads Peer Innovation, you can read it 20 times. That doesn't mean you're going to know what I know about Peer Innovation. And why? Because everyone looks at a book like you've got blank pages and you're trying to fill a couple hundred pages. The reality is I've got 5,000 pages and I'm trying to knock it down to under 200 to make it work. And this is what I think people who don't see themselves as experts in what they do, they see themselves as students in what they do. And the Larry Robertsons of the world and the Jake Jacobs and people like that, I think come at it from that place where A, they're a student, B, it's much more of trying to get something to where it's understood, but there's a whole lot that never finds its way into the book, not for any reason, not because anyone's trying to be stingy, but we know no one's going to read a 5,000 page book. So we got to do something with it, but it tends to inform a lot in terms of working, with clients. So I would just really advise people to put out there and lead with generosity, lead with your values, lead with trying to be helpful to your client. And the kind of people you'll want to be working with are the kind of people who will respond positively to that.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. It reminds me of a conversation, we often have with clients around the idea of a scarcity mindset versus an abundance mindset. And if you go
Exactly
into it and you try and kind of get that scarcity mindset, you want to hold back. Well, I don't know if I should give away all my information. What if I go into too much detail in my article? But as you're saying, the true clients, the best clients are the ones that they're not going to try and take what you have in the book and apply it all themselves. They don't have the time. They don't have the expertise. They want to shift that or delegate that to somebody like yourself that can just get them up and running and get them the result they want a lot faster. So that abundance mindset not only will benefit you, but it tends to also attract similar types of people and clients into your world and into your life. And therefore, you create so much more abundance together.
I actually give a DIY version of what I do for peer innovation and give it away.
Yeah.
You want to go do that? You should, go do that. And I encourage them to do that. And if they have a question, I'm happy to help them and do whatever. Right. I can't, there's millions of companies. I can't do this for everybody, and I don't need, in some respects, those who want to try it. And then for sometimes, oftentimes when people do that, what they do is they try it, they get into it and they're like, wow, this is really helpful. This is really good. But we know we can only take this so far. Mm-hmm. So next thing you know, I get an email or I get a call or something like that and says, hey, we ran this workshop and here's what we learned. Can you help us kind of, and this is resonating with our people now. Can you help us take this now to where we need to go with it? So right. Again, that's where that generosity, pays off for everybody, all involved.
Definitely. So before wrapping up, a few more questions here, Leo. And one of them is that you put out, again, a lot of intellectual property, a lot of content. When you look at your daily routine, what are kind of one or two habits that you do on a daily basis that you feel really are critical to your success, that really contribute and have a big impact?
Yeah. So for me, there's no daily routine. So that's number one. For some people there is. And I applaud that, by the way, for people who really can have a good daily routine.
Well, you're not the first person to say that, which is why I love asking that question, because there's no one way. I think last week I had somebody on the podcast and they said the exact same thing. Like, yeah, actually, I don't have a routine. But so I cut you off. Please continue.
No. My routine is only that I do get off to a very early start every day. I am up early. I get rolling. I think about, first of all, I think about what I want to read before what I want to write. That's a real balance for me that I want to make sure that I always, when I find myself in some, stretch where I feel like I'm writing and doing all this stuff and I'm not taking in enough content, that to me is like, that's not sustainable. That's not the right way to learning, grow, and what I need to be doing. So I try to take time to do those kinds of things. I will do some social media posts early. If I don't feel like writing an article, I'll go into Canva and I'll create like an infographic, or I'll have some fun. I mean, that's like my playtime, right? Where I'll get to do things that are actually of some visual interest and usually more utility than actually I give it credit for when I start it, by the time it's done. But then there are times where I do tend to write in the morning, and I tend to try to have meetings in the afternoon by and large. I'm worthless in terms of writing later in the day. It just doesn't work for me at all. I can do it, but it'll just take me 3 times as long. I mean, I can knock things out in the morning at such a rate versus anything I could ever do in the afternoon that I know that better about myself. But I do really try to. All I can say is that I have a range of things that I like to work on. There's no telling when I get up any day what I'm going to feel like doing in the moment, but at least I have something to choose from, I guess is my point, that kind of fits wherever I am. Even writing the book, some people are great about like, okay, I took X number of hours every morning and I wrote 10 pages, or they did whatever, their metric was for that. And I could no more do that. I mean, I'd have a week where I wouldn't even want to look at it. And then I'd spend 12 hours and I couldn't stop. I'm like, just blowing through, and you're just in a zone, and you're just like, next thing you know, it's dark out and you're wondering like what happened. So yeah, I'm a bit less disciplined than some, and not proud of that necessarily, but it's what it is.
You talked about reading and writing over the last 6 months. What's one of the best books? Could be fiction or nonfiction that you've read or listened to.
Wow. You know what? I'm going to look on because I'm really bad at remembering this particular title. And this was actually recommended to me by a Vistage member when I was speaking at their group. And it's called Primed to Perform.
You know who it's by?
I do. I'll get this in a second. By Neil Doshi, D-O-S-H-I, and Lindsay McGregor.
Okay.
And it's how to build the highest performing cultures through the science of total motivation. It's actually a really fascinating book. And so I'm not quite done with it. I still have 2 hours and 3 minutes left on the audiobook, but it's like a 10-hour book, I think, or something. Although, as we know, in many cases, you can listen to these things depending on how slowly they speak at a 1.8, usually it's, and you can build up to it over time, as we know, right? You just kind of get used to your brain taking that in. And, but I do enjoy that. And I did my own audiobook this time, which was, I worked with a guy, John Largent out of San Antonio. And that was so much fun. I had professional voice talent read the first two, and I'm like, I want to do this next one. And as much as I'm not going to tell you that when I said the end, I was done, doing it, because it's a pretty exhausting process, even with a not particularly lengthy book like mine was. But I think if it's a novel or something like that, right? I think professional voice talent can lend a lot to that. But I do think with a business trade book that involves a lot of concepts and personal stories and things like that, it's just really fun to have the author be able to really share that in person. And again, I've seen other books. Laura Kriska's book on we building, I think, is a phenomenal book. That's another great book out there. Jake Jacobs' book on culture. Of course, Larry Robertson's new book on rebel leadership is excellent. So there's some good stuff out there, and really worthwhile for people to read.
Fantastic. Well, Leo, before I wrap up, one final question. That is, where should people go to learn more about you, about your work, about your book, about everything you have going on? What's kind of the one place that you would encourage people to go to?
Yeah, well, definitely, connect with me on LinkedIn for sure. You can go to leobottary.com, leobottary.com, or you can go to peernovation.co, peernovation.co. Peer innovation is the word peer, people like me, and innovation, creativity realized, right? And it's this idea of what we're capable of when we do things together. But yeah, get me at Leo Bottary on Twitter as well, Facebook. But by and large, I'm probably most active on LinkedIn and Twitter in terms of social media platforms, and of course my own site. But yeah.
Fantastic. We'll have all that linked up in the show notes. Leo, thanks so much for coming on.
Fantastic. Enjoyed it.